and welcome to the Revolut Insider Podcast, where we explore Revolut's rocket ship from the inside out, one episode at a time. I'm your host, Alex Carril, and joining us today, we have Margaux Steisel, lead Employment Counsel and a member of our Parents Carers Guild. Hi, Margaux.
Hi, Alex. Nice to be here, and thank you for having me.
Of course. Thanks for taking the time. And before we get started, could you just tell us lead Employment Counsel? What does that mean?
So it means that basically I'm a solicitor or legal consultant, and I'm working on the employment matters for Revolut. So I sit with the legal department, and we are a team of 5 globally. And yeah, we manage everything to do with the employee lifecycle.
So for those that might be in the Americas, you're a lawyer.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, there's so many different names for those things.
Legal counsel,
lawyer, solicitor.
Incredible. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for all the work that you do for employees here at Revolut. So I thank you. And I know that a lot of parents here at Revolut thank you as well for the work that you do to help them and push positive policies and put them in place to have a great impact as a parent here at Revolut.
Well, I mean, I hope I will lift that standard.
I'm sure you will. And you have a wonderful story to share with us.
Yeah. So I think, today I wanted to share with you how Revolut, but also like my department, my team, my manager supported me through not only my pregnancy, my maternity leave, but also my return to work after my first child.
Well, I'm very excited to get into that story today. And can you just tell us something interesting about you or a fun fact that we might not know?
Well, I don't know if it's really fun, but it's actually quite interesting. I have 6 legal first names,
6?
Which is actually a tradition in the country I come from, which is Belgium.
Mm-hmm.
None of them were names that my parents ever contemplated giving me. They're like my godmother's name, my godfather's name. And my child has the pleasure to have the same.
Oh,
he
wow.
has 5 legal names.
Yeah, I just can't imagine filling out a form and having to write down each one or bubble in each letter for each name.
Yeah, especially when you move countries, it's actually a delight.
Well, I won't make you spell them out. Don't worry. Well, I want to say how we first met because our story kind of goes back a few months. I wanted to write an article and interview parents and carers here at Revolut, and that's how we met.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And when we had our conversation about your experience as a parent at Revolut, I knew that I wanted to tell your story in a different way. Mm-hmm. And here we are.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, a couple of months later.
Yeah. I remember you mentioned this would be great for a podcast, and that stayed with me. And I said, you know what? I'm definitely going to keep Margaux in mind.
Yeah.
We've launched it and here we are.
Yeah, it's a story very close to my heart, how, new parents come back to work after the birth of their child, and also how a company can further support them in that journey.
Can you tell me about your experience when you went on maternity leave?
Yeah, so basically I went on maternity leave in December 2021, so quite a while ago now. So I'm based in the UK, where our policy is actually very generous when you compare with what the market offers. So in the UK, you can go on maternity leave up to 12 months, but it doesn't have to be fully paid by your employer. So that means that after the mandatory maternity leave, your employer can either pay you the statutory maternity pay, which is like not that much, it's like £150 per week, or they can decide to basically up your pay, and Revolut matches your pay for 6 months, which is really, really generous. So obviously, as a future mother, future parent, it's something which is quite reassuring to know that, you'll be financially supported for the first 6 months after your child is born. So that's kind of the first way a company can support young parents, is to match their pay when they don't have a legal duty to do so. And obviously for me as well, it was, I was leaving at a moment which was, for my team, a bit difficult. I was kind of the only one in London. I had just interviewed my potential colleague who joined during my mat leave, and she's still with me today, and she's been a great help, and it's amazing to have a team. But at no point did I not feel that my managers and my colleague would not step in if they had to. So it enables you, of course, to go on leave, I'll say, like, quite light.
Yes.
And knowing that your work and your matters are going to be taken care of one way or another. And also, obviously, when I was on maternity leave, I was in contact with my colleague, not a lot, but still, the checking in and like inviting me for drinks sometimes after work, and like so that I would still feel connected with the team, which is also, I think, very important. I know that there is sometimes a little bit of, not reluctance, but managers do not always know what to do when people go on leave. They're like, we don't want to disturb. I think ultimately that's something that everybody should discuss with their report. But from my experience, it's always nice to get news from the office, especially when it's not about work. It's more about like, this happened. How are you doing? Do you want to come for like work drinks and so on? And And if people are not free, they will just not come
Exactly.
or not respond. But it's nice to feel like you're still part of a team, especially when your leave is quite long. So obviously I only took 6 months, but you can take up to a year in the UK. And it's a long time, a year. So it's important to maintain connection. And a lot of jurisdictions enable like the keep in touch days to like get employees to come to work without this being considered as return to work. So I would say that that's about like the financial support, but also the communication with your team and being updated about the changes, and then obviously preparing your return.
And maintaining those relationships, I think, is really important as well, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and it's true that there is not one answer and one methodology to do that. It's really communication. But without speaking for everyone, I do think that the majority of people would love to receive and to get news from the office.
Yeah. Where were you at the company when you went on maternity leave?
You mean in terms of like
Your position?
So I was senior employment counsel.
Okay.
But I was in kind of a one-man's team in London. So I had obviously one counsel in Lithuania and a paralegal in Poland, who's still there with me today. But to manage the global matters, I was kind of on my own, which was also quite difficult before I went on mat leave. And that's why my team actually continued the recruitment process when I was away to make sure that when I would come back, I would have someone to be with me in my team. And it was really nice. And it was another form of support, basically.
And I remember when we had spoken that you were planning to come back to a promotion.
I mean, it was not really a promotion per se, but it's more like my manager at the time had told me, look, when you come back, I want you to basically grow the team and create the team. So as I said, it's not a promotion in terms of like a seniority change or like, climbing a new level. It's more like a new scope and bigger responsibility, basically, like becoming a team owner. So I would say from my department, it's definitely a step up.
It sounds like it, yeah. How important do you think is that aspect of looking forward to coming back to work?
I think it's definitely incentivizing me to come back. So not saying that I was not thinking about coming back, but obviously when it was quite hard to be on my own. So it's true that the work was intense. I was working a lot. So when you leave work in those circumstances and you're going to have a child afterwards, you can be dreading coming back. But when you get that kind of testimony of trust and saying, look, the role is going to be there for when you come back and we're going to make sure that you have a team, I think it's the best way a manager can convince or at least massively incentivize their reports to come back to work, because that's true that it is a major issue around maternity leave. Is a lot of women will end up leaving the workplace because of various reasons, but one of them is how they feel they've been treated during their pregnancy at work, because there may be sometimes a tendency to put women on the side or assuming that because they're pregnant, because they're going to have a child, work may not be their priority and they will be less dedicated, which is absolutely not true. So for me, and I'm actually really careerist and I have a lot of ambition and I think it's perfectly compatible, it was exactly what I needed to be reassured that when I would come back, I would still be considered the same in terms of like my aspiration, my desire for growth and for promotion.
Definitely. And knowing that, like, how did that make you feel as a parent to be who is also striving to grow in your career?
Well, I mean, I'll say really good. It's not easy, but I think it's not easy for everyone, whether or not you have kids. But it's nice to see that, your team gets it, that the people around you, they get it, and that there is little to no difference as to what you were before. But equally, people are very conscious that, you may have to leave work every day at 5 and that doesn't matter because, you'll get the work done whenever it needs to be done. And that's what I love about Revolut in general, because even before having a child, I've always loved the flexibility that you get. We can work hard, but it's very much output based. So that means that if you deliver what you need to deliver, the rest is there for you, and I think it really fits the way I work and the way I want to work in the future as well.
It's great. Yeah. Okay. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back with more insider views. Did you know you can use your Revolut app to make a charitable donation? Choose from a huge selection of charities and effortlessly donate money with the tap. Charities get 100% of your donation, so you can feel good knowing that your whole contribution goes straight to the cause you care about. Do some good with Revolut. And we're back on the Revolut Insider Podcast here with Margaux Steisel, Lead Employment Counsel, sharing your experience here about being a parent at Revolut. Can you tell us, what can companies do to create a more supportive and inclusive environment for working parents?
Well, I think there are a couple of ways that you can obviously do this. So the first goes back to what I was just saying previously. It's about flexibility. And it's about obviously like, we always talk about those workplace where if you leave at 5 p.m., they're going to tell you, oh, you're taking your afternoon, which personally I've never heard of my entire career. And I worked in law firms before. But it's about, making it completely normal that, some people may pop in the office at midday because they've decided to work from their place in the morning because they wanted to avoid the commute. Equally, people would leave at 4 or 5 to pick up their kids and then log back on and do their work whenever they want, but with no expectations that people would have the same schedule as them, Like I would never expect my team members who, for instance, do not have kids to log back on in the evening if they don't have to, like there is no reason to do that. So I think it's about being flexible, but also respectful of others' people schedule and sometimes, emergencies or commitment. And it's not only about kids, it can be about anything. It can be about, I don't know, if you play sports and you've got like sports training, or if you have like other occupations after work. So that's the first main reason for me. And I think the other one is to have like family friendly policies. Not only for mothers, but obviously for partners. And also we should not only look at like traditional family model, we should be so much more inclusive in terms of like, different types of family, whether it's via surrogate, whether it's via adoption, for like same-sex families. And I think there is definitely a desire to do this. So, I mean, I'm working quite closely with, those work stream being an Employment Counsel, and consider alternatives option and listen to like feedback from other people or from like other industry leader, and there is an interest in that matter. So it's only going to get better.
That's great. And I remember during the interviews, I talked to a person who had a child via surrogacy. It was kind of a gray area of where it lied. And I remember connecting him with different people who could try to help to push this through, because we are changing, we are growing, we are willing to make these changes. And I feel like those are really important things for us as a company, but also for other companies to grow.
Exactly. There is no playbook for those kind of things, and I think that's what employees and people in general should always remember, is that the company is made out of people who have owned their own experience, their own way of seeing things. And, I mean, personally, my husband is a male. So it's true that I was never even thinking about potentially, the way the policy is drafted is not inclusive. Just doesn't mean that you don't think about it, but just because it's not your experience, sometimes you're not particularly focused on that. And so I think it's also important for employees to feel empowered to say that. And I think, things like feedback is very important, because there is a desire to make things better. And as I said, there is no playbook. There is not one rule. What you need to do is something which is fair and objective and transparent for all employees. And that may require iteration, that may require like trial and error. And that's perfectly fine. An employee needs to be conscious of that, that there is no desire to kind of have them worse off or like, not care for them. It's more about trying and basically doing what works for the majority. But sometimes what works for the majority end up, hurting other people. And that's where you need to be open to other feedback.
Yeah.
And I think Revolut is really trying to embrace that. Sometimes it's imperfect, but they want to just get better.
What do you think companies can do who might already have this playbook established?
Well, I mean, the world changed very quickly. I think, some of the debate that we have today, you would not even think about having them like 20 years ago. Like, I think my father was like proudly says that he never took any paternity leave when I was born. And I don't think you should brag about that. But, that's only my perspective. Today, you would not even think about that for fathers. Like, I mean, obviously, there are always exceptions, but most partners want to be included. So I think that's the beauty and also the difficulty of our world, is that there is so much more emphasis on the individuality that your playbook almost needs to get refreshed or looked at super regularly, because issues may arise, or like there may be, people that end up being worse off because of the way the policy has been drafted. That's unintentional, but you kind of need to review that. So yeah, I would say always remain open and open to criticism. It's about trying to achieve the greater good. So yeah, that would be my advice.
I like that. Stay open and try to achieve the greater good.
Yeah.
And talking about kind of the social aspect, you had mentioned the bias that exists from a business perspective about hiring men versus hiring women, which a lot of people don't realize that there are layers of this bias. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's biased, but it's also, we always talk about the glass ceiling, about the disparity in terms of gender representation at higher level of management across the labor market. And there are so many explanations for that. And I think sometimes unconsciously or like unwillingly, companies reproduce that because, as I said, and it comes back to what we said in the podcast earlier, sometimes there is an assumption around women that when they have kids, they end up, taking more of the, workload in terms of household management, and that their work will just not be the priority. And I think because there is this assumption, and it goes kind of both ways, it becomes a vicious circle, is that then some women will also feel like their place, the place they used to have at work, is not meant for them anymore, or like they don't have any possibility to grow. That's one. I think that's the main assumption. And the second is obviously when you go on maternity leave and you come back, you kind of lost 6-12 months. And so that can lead to you being behind your peers because you've taken a leave. So I'm not saying that tenure should never be looked at, but obviously management needs to be conscious of this in the terms of like women progression. And so if you end up granting the same amount of leave to men and women, you're also reducing this type of bias and this type of, I'll say, hurdle at the start. For instance, my husband and I, we both did 6 months. I did 6 months maternity leave and I did 6 months paternity leave because we can share parental leave in the UK. And not only did we love it from obviously sharing the load, but also it enabled us to better understand each other. Because there is a universal rule in a relationship is that you always think that the other one, that you're doing more than the other one. And that, the other one is just being lazy and doing nothing. I'm obviously it's not
generalizing, but yeah, I get it. Yeah.
And it's true. I started the maternity leave and I remember my husband was coming back from work and he was exhausted. And then he was just and I was telling him, take the baby. I just need some time for myself. I was but I'm tired. I've worked all day. And you've been home all day. And I remember it created a lot of tension. And then I came back to work. He went on leave. And he was just oh my God, I didn't think it was going to be like this. It's quite isolating. It's actually quite hard because there is no real routine. There is no rhythm. And so it's different type of challenge. And I was so happy to be back at work. But equally, I knew what it was to be alone home. It's very tiring. It can be, very isolating. So I think also from representation, a gender representation, it's very important to do this. But I know I'm getting completely off topic.
No, it all relates. So I get
it all relates. So what I meant is that I think there is obviously the duration of the leave, which is one key aspect in terms of bias, because obviously women leave for longer. So then they kind of, even if it's not voluntary, they deprive of sometimes progression and promotion opportunities just because by the sole fact that they haven't been there. They're replaced as well. So sometimes, there is a lot of sensitivity around, but their replacement is actually quite good. What do we do? So it's always those kind of difficulties. And then, as I said, the second one for me is obviously sometimes the assumption around this. And women can be their worst critics. And so they will be, if it's like this, then I better go somewhere else, while actually they were perfectly fine before. And that's something which is inherently in everyone, but particularly in women. There are 10,000 of other reasons, and I don't think we have time to go through all of them. But that's the two which speaks to me the most directly, I would say.
And what's been your experience comparatively at Revolut?
So obviously, I can only talk about my experience, but within my team, I didn't feel that this was held against me. I didn't feel that I was held back in my team, but I'm also very conscious that at the same time I had my child. My boss had a child as well. So I think this helped to understand some of the challenge that you may face. So it's certain circumstances that can also make it much easier to come back to work. So yeah, that's what I would say.
And it goes along with the being open and flexible to having these shared experiences, or at least having the empathy to understand. To understand, exactly.
And I'm not saying that the other people don't do this. I can just talk about my experience and my return to work with my team, which has been pretty positive.
That's great to hear. Yeah. Okay, so speaking of your department, actually has quite a few kids in it.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about supporting each other and kind of how that's been to grow your family alongside your colleagues?
Well, actually, it's quite interesting because, we have a few, I think, because obviously we have some colleagues which have older kids, but we're quite a few to have had kids at the same time. So now it's nice. Obviously, we try not to talk too much about our kids, but it's always nice to kind of exchange experience. And also, there was the Parents' Day, I think it was in May at Revolut.
Yes.
And we all kind of agreed to come with our kids. So I think it's nice because, every parent's faced the same challenge. And it feels like you're in this together. You know?
There's this great photo that was taken of Nick holding Tom's baby. It's so cute.
Yeah.
It got a lot of great feedback on social media. It's the cutest photo. Now, as a parent, how do you manage your work-life balance?
So I manage it not on my own. That's the first thing. So I've got a very, very committed partner who does, his fair share. And I think that's important to highlight. Doing this by yourself is very complicated. And, shout out to like everyone doing this by themselves. The other thing is that none of our parents live nearby as well. So like it's really the two of us. I would say, again, like I manage it by leaving work at 5, either to pick him up or at least, to go back home and just give him his dinner and like be with him if my husband is picking him up. And then I always log back on after 6:30 to kind of finish my work and work a couple of hours after. So I would say I feel like I can do this and that, there is absolutely no problem. I'm never taking calls between 5 and 6:30. That's like the worst hour. Like if you want to never schedule a call in a parent's calendar between 5 and 6:30. It's the same like between 9 a.m. Don't even try. It's like, running for your life to try to get everyone out of the door. I think that's just how it works. I'm very lucky that my child is never sick as well, because I think that's the stress of every parent is when your kid is sick. It's like, man, who's going to watch him? I mean, pretty simply, just by being super kind of communicative with my husband to know who's doing what and kind of balancing our work schedule, because he's also quite busy at work. He has loads of events he wants to attend, and same for me. So I'll say it's very intense weeks, but we make it work.
Yeah. And also knowing, like you mentioned, when to disconnect, right?
Exactly.
When to turn it off and know how to prioritize, when to prioritize. Yeah.
Exactly. And not feeling pressured to kind of, do something very quickly when it's just impossible for you to actually do that at the time, because you're literally with feeding your child or with your child in the bath,
Definitely.
Yeah.
Time is almost coming to a close, but I just want to ask you, what's your message for parents who are striving to find that work-life balance and also grow their careers?
I mean, I want to say, I think the first thing is to make sure that, you've got the right level of support, whether it's at home, but also at work, because there's a sentence that says it takes a village to raise a child. Obviously, you're not counting on your colleague to raise your child, but what I mean is that you are in need of support, and that's normal to ask for it. And that can be, like obviously having the help at home, but also like telling your colleague or your boss, look, I need to log on a bit later today, or being very communicative. I think everybody appreciates that, you've got emergencies with kids. I think if you deliver and if your work is done, no one will actually mind if you start a bit later. So I would say, I think it's really possible. You don't have to be perfect. It's very hard to be, it's actually impossible to be 100% everywhere. And I think you just have to accept it that you're doing your best at being a parent and at being a good employee, if I can say that like this. And as long as there is a will, there is a way.
Yes, great. Well, one final question before I let you go is, what advice would you give to yourself when you were just starting out in your career?
I don't know. It's been 10 years now. I think I would just be like, just do things when they feel right for you to do it. I think there is obviously in our society today a desire to plan everything and to have a plan for everything. And sometimes, life events just happen. And it's about, being flexible, doing the thing that you want when you want them to happen, whether it's in your life or in your personal life or in your professional life. That's the advice I would give. And not feel pressured by this social or any other type of external pressure to have these things or at least try not to be. I think it's harder saying than done. True. Easier said than done. Yeah. Easier said than done. Okay. But trying not to feel too pressured. It's obviously easier said than done. Yes. But it's what we can try to do the best. Yes. Well, thank you so much, Margaux. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us and sharing your experience. No problem. Thank you for having me. Thank you. Well, this has been the Revolut Insider Podcast. We hope you join us next time. You can hit subscribe, follow us on LinkedIn, and on Instagram at Revolut Insider. This has been the Revolut Insider Podcast, where we explore Revolut's rocket ship from the inside out. Until next time, remember, the sky's not the limit, it's just the beginning. Revolut. Change the way you money.